Welcome everybody to our second podcast. The title of this podcast, number two, will be "The Compromise." On board today, we got Randy and Dan Davila. Randy Santucci, who really has been a catalyst for keeping this thing alive. Again, for all those that are listening to this, you may want to go back and catch number one podcast that we shot a couple weeks ago. Um, Two is what we're doing, and it's a little painstaking, so you have to kind of bear with us. We have quite a few things planned for the podcast. We're going to have some pretty big names and also influential people that were involved and have cardinal knowledge of how this took place, why it took place. Don't want to say those names just yet, but some of these are on a national scale, some are on a regional scale, some are people that are heavily involved in Pennsylvania. So those are all good things that we're going to have. So just to kind of go over what the plan is today is to talk about the compromise. We have different segments of today's agenda. We may get to all three, but chances are we may not. What we have on the agenda today is obviously the compromise, the economics of it. Now, this is not the economic study that we are. That is still to come. This is an economic study that was done back when Randy got his chance to talk to Pennsylvania Game Commission. And then also we have on the agenda today, we might get to it, we may not, is actually to dissect the survey that they did. So with that in mind, here's Randy Santucci, and we'll get started.
Good morning, everyone. As Dan mentioned, this is our second podcast as we move through this. And the last podcast, I think one thing that I feel we forgot to mention was with the understanding that, some people like the Saturday, but of course there was a bunch of negatives that we exposed, was the fact that there was a compromise, which was the aspect of instead of taking away everything that was damaged with the Monday opener, taking that first Sunday that was approved from the legislature of the three and putting it onto that next weekend. So in other words, the Monday opener would still happen on Monday. The benefits that come with that, with the economic, with the traveling hunters, with the family Thanksgiving problems, so forth and so on, would be remedied. And it would allow hunters to start on Monday and hunt straight through for 13 consecutive days, right through that Saturday, Sunday of that, which was the traditional opening Saturday. And of course, the Sunday would be there. And down the road, potentially, who knows, they're talking a few more Sundays. Maybe they tack a Sunday on the far end. So we have 2 full weekends from Monday straight through 14 days. But as it stands, that compromise was something that was very much recognized, not only by those of us who were deeply involved in this, but it was mentioned by many of the businesses that were hurt by this. In other words, they weren't trying to take away days of hunting, as we're not. They saw, hey, this would be the better of the two. Put that Sunday there, leave the tradition alone of Monday, and everybody wins. So that I just wanted to mention early on because we didn't touch on that. For anybody sitting there thinking, wow, this is all, you only want it one your way, and there's no there was a compromise. So that said, we mentioned the last week about economics, and there are several factors that identify with the economics. And I don't know if I mentioned this in the last podcast or not, in February of 2020, which was after the first day, I was invited by Representative Bud Cook, and there were others on a panel to testify regarding the side of this thing of the hunters that don't like the Saturday opener. And I presented, and I had to do some research, but I presented a bunch of evidence from businesses, from Chamber of Commerce executive directors, different people, of how damaging this was. And I just want to share some of that today for anybody out there saying, well, how do you know there was economic damage? What proof do you have? I've heard that. So we're going to show some of that today, which, of course, I'm just, I don't have a crew. I can't canvass every business in the state. So I started off with 10 businesses that I felt would have been most representative of the impact, which were mostly sporting goods stores, a few restaurants, bar grill type places that see the hunter, coming in for dinner and so forth. And to tell the story, it was kind of ironic because when I contacted these businesses, now they were from eastern northern tier to pretty far over on the west Wilkes-Barre even area. These people, these business owners, I called them. I was hoping to get a letter to ask them how this unfolded, the economic impacts as compared to their history of Monday openers in the past. They were already writing the stories to the Game Commission. And I have the 10 letters here that I did present to the legislators. And it just got no traction. It was stunning to me that an impact of this magnitude. Let me just kind of surmise, first of all, the dollar factor. Of the 10 businesses that I contacted, they identified the collective impact. In other words, from the total of the 10 businesses, came to $360,000 of lost sales revenue after the first Saturday opener weekend. That would have been 2019 Saturday opener. It was shocking, the numbers. Now, at times I brought this up in other conversations, and I hear a pushback. Well, COVID. No. COVID didn't happen that year. So that fallacy that somehow COVID was impacting those sales numbers was completely inaccurate. So this was strictly based on the changing of the deer opener from the Monday opener, which provided the time for people to patronize through that weekend, to the change to the Saturday, which made it a mad rush to get there Friday, and no one had the time any longer to go to the sporting goods stores, stop at the restaurants. That all just evaporated overnight. Businesses were caught with inventory, built up for that big weekend, which was identified to me as one of their largest sales weekends of the year. So that factor alone, when I testified, that was stunning to me, that it got no traction anywhere. So just in brief, I could read a couple of these letters. Now we've got, if you want to go over to the eastern side of the state, I'm just going to tap on these things. I'm not reading the whole letters. This one was from a business up in Wilkes-Barre, JNS Sporting Goods, for those of you that know that area. The gentleman's name was Paul Scavone. And just one sentence out of Paul's letter: I'm an avid deer hunter and have been for the last 43 years, loving the sport so much. I opened a hunting store and have been in business for 33 years. During this time, I've never heard so much anger over a new change that has impacted our sport as I'm hearing now. Speaking to sportsmen in my area, about 90% of them shared their frustration and concerns over changing the opening day from Monday to Saturday for many reasons. His dollar figure, which he compared, he said, I've lost 2 days of weekend sales, which equates to about $20,000 that his business lost in comparison to previous years. So moving forward, smaller businesses. Here's one from up in Kane, a nice lady by the name of Peggy King. And Peggy, do not understand this is our people, they were talking about how the agency doesn't understand the impact of this. This is our life and our family's life. Do you not have a heart about the effect of you're doing to small communities and some bigger ones too? I've never been so scared in my life about paying bills as I am right now. I can't pay this month's gas bill. My husband is working 2 full jobs, but it's still not enough to help our home and business. I know you have got 3 Sundays approved for the next hunting season, and I pray you take all of us into consideration before making the final decisions. And I propose to you for the 2021 season, opening day Monday, November 30th, with Sunday rifle beginning on the 6th, which makes the season run straight through without breaks. So what I said earlier, there it is. There's that compromise that was recognized by general business owners. A couple more here. Here's another one, a short one. This is from Route 66 Sporting Goods up in, this is in Shippenville, I believe. The owner there, the manager, we lost $31,000 in sales in comparison to previous years. So that was another story. We've got one from Mars Trading Post, $35,000. That's more to the western side, up south of Franklin, almost in Franklin. And as you move forward on these other ones, there's a bunch of them. Sportsman's Outfitters in Knox, PA, same story. They lost approximately, here it is here, being an industry with small profit margins, a hunting season sales loss of over $30,000 is something hard to overcome. That came from Knox, PA. This particular gentleman had told me a story that when his Savage Arms sales rep came in, he had to reduce his order for the subsequent year significantly. They lost so much sales of guns and rifles and so forth that weekend that their salesman, what happened? The Savage Arms salesman, and he explained to them, our biggest sales weekend was just taken away from us. Here's one I think that's going to set a lot of people back. There's a store up in Clearfield. I'm sure many of you know it. It's one of the largest sporting goods stores in the state. Grace Gun Shop. Tom Grace had weighed in on this and presented his figures. And here is what he said. My concern is a financial one. The Saturday opener has hurt the income of thousands of hunting-related businesses in the state. I do not know the amount of dollars that have been lost. I would conservatively guess 100 million lost statewide in just 3 days, but I will confidentially share with you my sales figures. He lost, and he had showed those, and here's the letter. So I'm not making this up. This is all stuff that came from these businesses. And Tom's losses from Black Friday, Saturday, and Sunday equated, now remember, in comparison to previous years, $206,000 loss because of the traffic that was lost coming through his store. Those letters, and again, there were 10 of them, and I could have gotten more, certainly. I didn't get more and cherry picked 10 in case anybody's saying, oh, these are only the 10 business. No, I contacted 10, and each of the 10 had the damage. So that to me was a very stunning revelation that I did present, and that continued. And how that continued is when you go back to these towns, and here's another one here. And I try to pick some of these bigger ones because more guys out there, more of us hunters, may have frequented these businesses. Now, here's a big one, too. You've probably heard of Bob's Army Navy in Clearfield. Same thing. He wrote a letter to the Game Commission that how damaging this was. Never received a response. When Tom closed the store, he did a thing here called the store closing bullet points. You can see it right there. Store closing bullet points. And they had been in business for 74 years. 74 years. And I thought this was highly telling that a business that's been in business 74 years had something in their departing bullet points. In other words, the reasons why they closed the store. Of course, there was the general one, supply chain issues. The family didn't want it. I was getting too old. Those sorts of things. But in those points, let me read this. Game Commission starting deer season on Saturday also cost us a lot of business, with the 3 busiest days of the year for us to be abolished. So for those out there that said that I had no basis making claims that this had a serious economic impact across the state, it wasn't me as much as how this was being validated by these businesses that knew the topography of what was happening. So I wanted to touch on that. Moving forward, when this was brought to the Game Commission, I testified. And later on that year, which is back in 2020, I think there's an article in York Dispatch, which I have here. This was done, an interview with then President Charlie Fox, who has recently passed away, and respectfully, God bless Charlie. He did a lot of things for the sporting industry, for us hunters. But this particular topic here, where he was in alignment with this change, um, he made a comment that I presented 10 letters to the agency of the impact. And those letters were identified. And let me just read this to you. In addition, during the PGC meeting, newly appointed board president Charlie Fox read correspondence from several businesses saying the Saturday opener for firearms deer season was the most profitable they have had. Where that came from, I don't know. And the letters countered a claim made during the public comment portion of the meeting that 10 businesses had a combined six-figure revenue. Now, obviously, in my opinion, this was something to try to offset what I presented. The letters I presented, ladies and gentlemen, were facts. I presented facts, and he referred to them as claims. When you refer to something as a claim, it certainly tries to take away from the credibility aspect. So this kind of angered me that not only were they ignored, they were basically tried to be squashed from a standpoint they weren't credible. It was a claim. These were claims. So those sorts of things are what moved on forward with this economic. On a statewide scale, again, we had someone reach out to us, and this was a director of the Cameron County Chamber of Commerce. Here is that letter. Here, there were two of them. She had sent one early on in 2019, which was this one, and one in 2022, this year. When it first happened, the executive director, Tina John Solak, wrote this letter, and I'm writing this letter on behalf of the businesses in Cameron County regarding the Pennsylvania Game Commission change of the opening of rifle deer season. The Saturday date economically crippled several of our businesses, which depend on a shot in the arm prior to the typical slow first quarter of the year. L&M Hardware, East End Beverage, the Willows Restaurant, Cinema Hunting Tavern, Emporium Food Market are just a few that have contacted me directly regarding loss of sales compared to 2018, despite optimal weather conditions for hunting. So there was that effort there to dispel, wait a minute, there wasn't anything else. This was because of the change of the opening day. So in previous years, Dan, as you and I had talked, it explains it here. Very clear. In previous years, they would arrive Friday night, spend Saturday purchasing groceries, eating in local establishments, and even work on projects at the camp. Sunday, they would attend numerous fundraising dinners. There we are with the fundraising events.
Yeah, first responders took a major hit on this, not to mention the fact that the lack of due diligence on the Pennsylvania Game Commission's part to not really look at all the aspects of changing this opener would affect. And quite frankly, it was a slap in the face to the retail partners of the Pennsylvania Game Commission who sell their hunting licenses. There was not any contact. Nobody knew this was coming. For those on our Facebook page, a couple guys said we need to get legislature involved in this. They were part of the reason that this took place. And Randy will touch on the fact that this was key to the Sunday hunting deal. Randy and I don't have a position one way or the other about Sunday hunting. What we're trying to protect and what we want the voices of the massive camp owners and people that are used to the tradition of rifle deer season was that this is the only opener that's really tied to a national holiday, which is a family event of Thanksgiving. The rush to get there. So they changed the tactic to where they made this claim that they were going to make this will be for the good of everybody, and like everybody else, we all went along with them. It was to raise the level to give youth an opportunity to hunt. Well, we're going to show that that did not take place. In addition to that, if anything, it has shortened the stay of hunters during that time period, which is why the revenue losses are so dramatic. You don't move that amount of people to another day and not have some cause and effect. Their own agency staff presented documentation to them that supported our claim that this is not something that the mass of hunters wanted to do. Randy and I are clearly understanding that there are going to be some folks that the Saturday opener was more convenient for them, but by and large, we feel that the survey, which was very short-sighted, did not represent the mass appeal of that Monday opener, and it did not address the issues of what we feel is the core of the Pennsylvania hunting experience for rifled deer.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I've looked at this, and I've always felt, hunters are a brotherhood to a degree, and I'm in the belief that if more hunters knew that this compromise was available to extend the season, to have a full weekend, and so forth and so on, there would have been, or even understand the damages that were incurred from this, which most people may not have understood as far as hunters. A lot of hunters may have had a different opinion. Okay, we can live with this. You're giving us that Sunday. We have a full weekend coming up, so forth and so on. While we're talking on this point, Dan, I think I'll mention here that our Facebook group, which is called Pennsylvania Hunters Against the Saturday Deer Opener, is one you can get on. There's a link on there that I just posted, and last night I think it was, Dan. And we have a Real Tree Outdoors, a national, highly popular company regarding hunting, did a video in 2018, right before this change, identifying Pennsylvania's hunting tradition on that weekend and the Monday opener and so forth. This is something I think a lot of people can jump on our group and watch. And it was just, frankly, I'm quite surprised. We'd never heard of it before now. It was a well-done video from Realtree, but it identified that Monday opener tradition, and even through the youth aspect, But back to the economic thing here, when these two letters came to me from Cameron County, let me read the last sentence from the first one in 2019. I would sincerely hope that those in the position of making these decisions regarding opening dates would not only take into consideration hunters, but the effect on locally owned businesses in rural areas which depend on the influx of hunters for economic reasons. 3 years later, the second letter, and she identifies stories from these same type of businesses, L&M Hardware, and she interviewed some. Here's a gentleman by the name of Scott. Let me see here, Scott Hendrick, and owns the Driftwood Saloon in Driftwood, Pennsylvania. Prior to the change, hunters would come to camp Friday, Scott deer or work on the property Saturday, Sunday before eating at the restaurant each night. Now Scott reports that hunters arrive Friday, hit the woods Saturday and Sunday, then return home time for work on Monday, leaving no time for visiting the restaurant. Scott says his taxes prove a financial loss of $25,000 in 2021 for the opening weekends of bear and deer seasons. There were other stores in that same area. Now, the sad part of this is this was brought to legislators' attention. I sent a letter to Senator Chris Dush. His particular district is highly infiltrated with camps. This would have had a significant impact on his area. And Cameron County is in Senator Dush's district. And there was no interest to take a look at this to see if indeed the damaging aspects did happen, number one. Number two, that maybe this compromise should have been implemented to not damage this aspect of that's linked with that opening day of hunting season. So, moving forward here, I wanted to bring this to the attention of the people from the first podcast that listened to us, that if you wonder why there was an economic impact, hopefully now you'll understand a little bit And this is something that is significant. Now, is it the Game Commission's responsibility to worry about that? I mean, I've heard that comment. Dan, what do you feel about that as far as?
Well, um, you don't make decisions where you're moving 500,000 people without having a cause and effect. I would have liked to seen a lot more input to it. They kind of brushed it under the table, and then we got hit with the COVID. Then there were other issues with them that they were not able to make a decision, and I felt they soft played this where they didn't have a quorum. So when after the 3 years, that was the compromise that they were asked. Well, give it 3 years and then we'll revisit it. Well, it did not get revisited, and in place of the revisiting, they did a 2,000. What was it, Randy? 2,000 persons a phone survey with an outside company.
Yeah, that was after, and I think Dan, you brought something up there that was, I think, poignant. That when the hunting license sales saw no significant increase. In fact, I have the numbers here. We're going to review them here shortly. This basically fell flat, and youth resident sales dropped each year of the 3 years of the opener. There was a scramble, I think, to somehow pull this thing together with something. And the phone survey was done. And we're gonna talk about surveys and so forth and present that data here shortly. But when we talked about, Dan, how you mentioned the Game Commission soft played this and so forth, the recent president, Mike Mitrick, he was interviewed by an outdoor writer, and he was questioned regarding this work that we're doing to expose this and this economic side of things. And let me read something to you which struck me as very what's the word I'm looking for here? Stunning. That a state agency had no concern for business communities. Let me read the president of the Game Commission board what his comments were. He did question just how much of an economic impact the change had on businesses, and if it is an issue that's even in the agency's purview. The Game Commission is not in the business of supporting local communities. Our main concern is the resource and habitat, Mitrick said. Pretty cold and calculated. The Game Commission is not in the business of supporting local communities. Maybe how's that from the agency? So these types of points are the things that have kept me and brought Dan with me here now. Dan has jumped into this. He's wholeheartedly understands this thing, as most people do in our coalition, in our Facebook page. But that comment, these things, that's why I wanted to share these with our hunters of Pennsylvania. We deserve better. We have people in there serving are supposedly serving our positions as hunters, which, that's an argument, but you have to weigh in all the parameters when you make a decision. You can't disenfranchise 25-35% of your hunters that like this structure, and maybe more. I mean, when we're just referring to the traveling hunters, but that particular comment kind of was the icing on the cake for me about a total disregard for something that was pretty significant regarding this. Dan, I don't know if we have anything else economically. Here is one more before we move on. This came from Senator Hutchinson. It was forwarded on to the Game Commission. I met with Senator Hutchinson, and he had already heard from the businesses in his district. And first, let me be clear that I have been long believed and advocated for Monday opening days starting several years ago for antlerless deer season, which you nixed previously, and now for the traditional deer rifle season opener. Besides being a hunter, I am also a traditionalist. If it's not broke, don't fix it. P.S. What's really was broke with the 70-year-old Monday opener. But even more importantly, I believe that economic impact is greatly heightened in the destination counties where I live and which I represent, with a lead-in weekend before the season opener. Senator Hutchinson. The recognition of the Monday opener had negative impacts economically with bear season when it was changed. It did a similar situation. and now again with the deer season. So I just want to put this out there for Dan and I and the guys like me that have been pushing this, and the naysayers. How do you know? What's your evidence? What's your basis of saying that? Hopefully now you understand there's a basis, and we're going to continue moving forward with this with all of the parameters that have negatively affected this. Keeping in mind, we're not losing track of the guys that liked it, but we would like to see the shift, bring those days in for the Sunday and so forth. So
Yeah, you're right, Randy. We're not here to advocate shortening the amount of days in the woods. All we want to do is make sure that this protect this what we call and characterize as the Super Bowl of hunting. Everybody from a very young age, when you looked, the very first thing when you got your new calendar was to flip to November, December to see how it fell, how Thanksgiving fell, if it was early, if it was late. It was a big deal. For me, I'm 68 years old, going to be 68 years old. Uh, I don't really need to have to feel that by making this change, the compromise that would affect me one way or the other about getting a deer. That's not what this is about. What this is about is the tradition. It was about bringing the youth up so that they could experience the culture at camp. And as you know, Randy, there's things like out of state category. Those guys have a long way to drive. Now you're making fellas make a choice between family and buttoning up Thanksgiving and heading to camp earlier because now that you got the opening day right on the heels of Thanksgiving. I don't think they did a service. They're not representative to what we feel is the mass of appeal to keep it at a Monday opener. The survey that they did, they obviously they were the ones that did the questions. So Randy's going to go over that. We had no say in that. We also feel that most of the hunters, the mainstream hunters, don't really have a voice. And that's what this comes down to is like this is one of the few state agencies that doesn't have, there's no oversight. These guys make decisions. The governor appoints the commissioners. I even question on whether or not some of the commissioners even have the background to actually represent the mass appeal of the hunters. And right down to like when this thing first transpired and all these letters and emails were going to the Pennsylvania Game Commission, did the commissioners even see the emails? Did they even read the letters? We've had very few responses where people could say, well, here's a letter or an email that I got back from the Pennsylvania Game Commission. That's because the staff is reading them.
Yeah, let me take that a step further. What you just said regarding the letters, I think they are all forwarded to the commissioners, which to me makes it even more egregious that most, if not all, the people I spoke to that contacted the agency didn't get a response. So like Bob Grimminger at Bob's Army Navy and other of these people that sent letters, and did you ever hear back? I asked them. No. So I'm not going to say they didn't see them. They're going to say, oh, yeah, we read them. Well, that's fine. I'm glad you did. But certainly you would think that there would have been some sort of collective response that should have been put out there to these businesses of where this was headed, identifying the 3-year test period. Nothing was done.
And not only that, Randy, you're talking about retail partners of the Pennsylvania Game Commission. And let me tell you, there's a lot of paperwork that's involved in selling the licenses at store level. It's not an easy thing, and they don't get paid for it,
Yeah, there were a lot of businesses I spoke to that were considering dropping license sales over this because they felt so slighted that they had taken such a hit on one of their most profitable weekends of the year, and like you stated, weren't even notified. But one thing that you said now when you started on your segment there, your age, 67, I'm 63. Okay, certainly this is something that's more near and dear to the older demographic of hunters. I get that. But I have some numbers here in that December meeting of 2018 when the commissioners were discussing this and trying to sell it, basically, my opinion, trying to sell it to themselves because everything was saying no from surveys and so forth. From that 2017 hunter survey, there was an individual seated there that day on the board he wasn't a commissioner. I'm not exactly sure who he was. I should know it, but I don't. The gentleman spoke about that 65% opposition to changing the opening day. He said that was made up of the group of that's opposed it that was from 46 years and older. Well, okay, now you're starting to see 46 isn't exactly ancient, and there seems to be some age discriminatory thought process going on here. Number one. Now, when he mentioned about in that group of the ones that opposed it, the age group of 26 to 45. Now, if you're calling that old, I'm dead. Okay. So 26 to 45, 55% of that group wanted the Monday. So the agency did not truthfully represent, not only there was this was about the Sunday hunting squeeze, this was about legislators who they were concerned about working with Senator Laughlin. He's been the big pusher for Sunday hunting. But the numbers regarding that first survey, when they're trying to sell this, well, that's just the old guys, was not true. And things just kept moving forward. And like I mentioned in the first podcast, the metrics were not being analyzed, or should I say assessed accurately and to some degree truthfully. So, us having some old age guys involved. I think in the Pennsylvania Outdoor News, there was an article not too long ago about some dismissing of older hunters, and it was really, really blew up, pushed back hard. And I said this earlier, I think our average age of our hunters in Pennsylvania now is 58. So I don't give a damn how old you are. If you're in that age group, that was mentioned in this survey, that should have been a pertinent survey to making this decision, and it was completely misrepresented at that December 8, 2018 working group meeting, which led into the 2019 decision making. So from economics, and I think from the fallacy of this is going to be a big benefit to the youth aspect, Dan, I don't know. Maybe that takes us into the license sales now, or because that kind of validates that this was not any great shakes to license sales. I have those numbers right here. And is that the next way, the direction we should go here now? I would think possibly. What's your opinion, Dan? You think we should go into the license sales now, or?
Well, we could, or we could actually start on the survey. But I'd say let's throw some numbers out there on license sales.
All right, give me 1 second here to grab this here, and I try. Remember, I don't have a staff here, so I'm trying. I have to have all my stuff here within arm's reach to bring this on board. But let me pull up the license sales aspects here. Here they are here. All right. Now, let's talk about general sales first. In 2018, the year before the first opener, the general sales was 846,226. That was your total, 846,226. In 2019, it went up from 846 to 849, was I think 0.4%, very, very tiny increase, not even really all that significant. And what made that even less significant, when you have a category of hunters that were referred to as the senior lifetime combo renewal category, which is a group that buys that license and has been increasing every year. Now, here is the page here from the Game Commission sales report, which shows every year that category, as more seniors have been aging into that senior lifetime renewal category, renewing their license, it increased from in 2008, 33,000, 2009, 38,000, 2010, 42,000. It increased 3,500 to 4,200 in that range every year. So that was baked into this. That was going to happen again in 2019, which it did. So the number increased from 2008 from 33,000 to 2018 of 71,000. So it was a 3,000 to 4,000 license increase a year. When you take that one category and you subtract it from the general sales total of 2019, which was the first year of the Saturday opener, that the Game Commission was trumpeting a 0.4% license increase, it wipes that 0.4% out. And their actually license sales would have been in the red. So there's some smoke and mirrors here that hunters don't quite see that was sold to the Sportsman of Pennsylvania.
And hence Daniel Lachlan then weighs in. And what was his comments about it? This is how they pushed it through. They didn't have a quorum, so it never got voted on or addressed the proper way, the way that we felt that we were told it would be addressed, because they didn't have a quorum. And so Daniel Lachlan's take on it was he wants to hunt with his kids, and they got to go back to college. Well, we've already talked to numerous people. The guys that hunt, they were going to hunt anyway, whether they had school or not. The Saturday deal, trade-off between the mass of guys that wanted to keep it Monday versus a few of the youth that may, or guys that didn't want to take a vacation day. Well, I don't know. It worked for all those years, and now all of a sudden they open it up Saturday. And Randy, one of the things we did, there's been a lot of date changes. They're trying. I understand, and I'm not criticizing them for trying to make things work for the different species that we're hunting. My point is that they didn't do enough homework on this one. This one here was a big deal, biggest of any of them during the year. And it's almost like some guys have actually waited on our Facebook page. What are they trying to do? Kill the rifled season? And everybody's going to end up getting a crossbow or bow hunting, and you've seen that category go way up. A lot of deer tags have already been filled. So I don't know that anything that they were going to try to do by adding, changing the day back to Saturday would have helped their numbers on what they said it was going to affect.
And to validate, like what we're saying here, when you go into 2020, now 2020 saw a license increase from 849,000 up to 873. That's COVID. And the Game Commission themselves identified, and I have the letter, that they don't even weigh in on 2020 license sales because it was an anomaly. It was adversely, or should I say inappropriately, affected by COVID. License sales increased in fishing and hunting and all outdoor activities that year. So they washed that out. So that jump. And I think what was interesting about that, the next year, which was 2021, which was the third year that was supposed to have been evaluated, the license sales fell back down from 873 back down to 852, which is only slightly above where this whole thing started. So ideally, that aspect of COVID was pretty much validated the very next year. They lost over 21,000 licenses, fell off that next
Randy,
year.
let me throw something out to you, Randy. If you had a great experience in 20, which that increased group obviously didn't, because they didn't buy a license the year before or the next year. And why do you suppose that was? Well, I mean, that leads us into a whole nother category.
Yeah.
There's no deer in a lot of the areas that guys used to hunt. They're just not.
Well, the experience total, whether it was deer or the traditional aspects that cement a lot of this for a lot of hunters, may not have been there. And I guess when you look at these 3 years, how the license sales had fluctuated, the really unique part of this is in 2018, there's two main categories for junior. There's junior and junior combo. Okay. You combine them pretty much to establish your resident I'm not concerned about the non-resident stuff. That some of those did increase very slightly, non-resident junior licenses, but I'm not getting into out-of-state stuff. I'm talking about Pennsylvania residents is where this board and this agency should be most concerned about. And the 2018 total for junior, and I'm combining both categories, was 65,971. All right. 2019, first year of the Saturday opener, it dropped to 63,261. Okay, down 2,700. Went down the first year. Come into the next year, which was the COVID bump, the big boom, 20 plus thousand licenses, general sales that I just mentioned. In 2020, they dropped 620 licenses. Doesn't sound like a lot, no. But when you realize the fact that the general sales were up over 20 some thousand and the resident youth dropped, does that tell you this is a great stimulator for youth hunting? Come on, people, think about these numbers. And nobody cared about this. And when you go into 2021, again, resident youth dropped again down to, from 62,641 in 2020 to 60,008, down 2,633 licenses. So each of the 3 years of the Saturday opener, which was supposed to be the test years, license sales fell in the resident youth category. Now, my numbers here are up to 1231. I have, you're saying, well, where do you get that? Are you making these numbers up? Here you go. All right. There's the Game Commission spreadsheets with license sales from 18, 19, 20, and 21. And those license categories that I mentioned, and the fact that they dropped, is right there, black and white, but it was to the end of the year. Now, when I say end of the year, calendar year, 12/31. I didn't have the license sales forward. But here's the key to that. Don't matter. Because if the license sales as of the end of the year, opener is gone. Deer season's pretty much behind you. Any license sales sold moving forward would be more toward a muzzleloader or a turkey or something like that. So the impact. Now, I did try to get these end of year license sales from the Game Commission. I contacted Mr. Lau by email and voicemail several weeks ago to get the end of year, which would be license sales end June 30th for these 3 years and 4 years. Never got a response. So I have to stay with what I have, which is the end of the calendar year, 12/31 of those years, 18, 19, 20, 21, which again, I think are still representative of the opening day situation versus what may have happened over the next few months regarding turkey hunting and, maybe some late season guys buying some flintlock stuff or muzzleloader, which is great, but relatively insignificant, or should I say unrelated to the opening day scenario, which the end of the year, calendar year, tells the story. So back to the license, everybody that was been jumping on the bandwagon, how great this has been for license sales. Show me your numbers. Okay. I'll gladly, send these to you and you can see. In fact, the funny thing was there were some categories, even military sales went down. So that special category, I didn't detail that right now, but I remember that from my testimony. That was another category that didn't increase. And that was a touted one, military home from, for Thanksgiving would have had time to hunt. Didn't do it. And so again, trying to bring this information forth in a truthful way to validate our side of this and the side of all the people that like that Monday opener tradition, economics, family time. That's why we're here. So,
Randy, let me ask you a question. Where do we go from here? Let's tell the viewers what our game plan is and what we want to see. What is the end game here for us? And I think both of us need to kind of weigh in on that because this is taking some time. I came on board a little bit late. I came in on, I read your letter in the Pennsylvania Outdoor News when it was at January, and then I contacted you in February, and so then we were asked to testify. I believe it was April. which, by the way, to all the folks that may know or may not know, our testimony was not record. They did not record it. So we got a chance to talk. Nothing was going to happen. And because they had already done it, they already voted. And so to extend it. So for me, my goal here is to get this back on the table. And I would like to have a proper survey done. Randy and I are looking into some other aspects of a survey done by a third party, somebody in the state of Pennsylvania, not outside the state, and would put together the questions that we feel are pertinent to make sure that the decisions that are made are from the hunters, not from the Pennsylvania Game Commission. And
you're right, Dan. I mean, I want to just kind of jump in here with, because you're bringing a point up, and I want to get it out before I forget. Is when you look at the this aspect regarding the decision-making process on this, how do you have a senator weighing in that he wants to take his college kids out, and when the staff reports from the Game Commission came out, showing that demographic said that they didn't care about that it wasn't going to be an issue. They'd miss class regardless of deer season, those sorts of things. So we were kind of like ignoring all of this information that should have been very pertinent in this process. So when we talk about who likes this and who doesn't, let's just say for a second it's a split, 50-50. Let's just say for a minute. Well, that's great, but the 50-50 split, the 50 that like the Monday opener, the 50 that the economics would benefit and traditions and family and all that stay the same. Well, let's look at the other side, the ones that don't like it, the ones that like the Saturday, I should say. They could have been compromised with that additional day on that upcoming Sunday. So there was a solution here to help a stronger majority of the Pennsylvania hunters. And there was something said at the meeting that I wanted to mention, and I think I mentioned this to you, Dan, before. Commissioner Brian Hoover, and he was discussing, well, there's this feeling that if you're not out opening day, you don't have a chance of getting a buck. He clearly identified that no longer was the case. And the way he identified that was, before, when we had 1 million hunters in the woods and the deer movement was that much bigger, blah, 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 that might have been a pertinent issue. But he said now, with the smaller amount of hunters we have in the woods, more guys are tagging out with archery and so forth, that fallacy of you have to be out on the opening day to kill your buck is no longer the case. And he looked at the other commissioners and said, on our data shows that. So the aspect of what was a day that, you might want to get out because it was a very high probability, they 70% or more bucks were taken.
Yeah, it was an odd. It was your odds. Your odds were better
because you were moving more deer, and that's not the case anymore. And that was identified by one of the commissioners, Brian Hoover, at that meeting. I have his actual quote here, and I'll find it here. We can read it. It's a sentence or two. But again, the truthful aspect of things that was not assessed. And that's why when you talk about, well, how many like this, how many don't, even if it's split down the middle, all of the other peripherals of this should have been assessed, economics, and the things we've been talking about. So, but
right down to the governor, Randy. I mean, the governor's clearly. I don't. We haven't talked to him. I asked for a meeting with him. I've not heard back. What I would like to do was, you feel that you had Saturday was Small Business Saturday, you had Black Friday, Small Business Saturday, Cyber Monday. Now you had these 3 retail events, which their decision to move that would be in direct conflict with the governor's, which is to keep the economics of Pennsylvania strong. with the advent of everybody buying now on Amazon, anything that you can hang on to traditional shoppers, and they're still out there. Um, that's all part of this. That's all part of the tradition.
Right.
And the hunters played a big role in that as well. So that's all gone.
Right. And I did find that note that I have here, what I wrote down. This is verbatim what Commissioner Hoover said. This was at the March 25th, 2019 Commissioners working meeting. Everybody has that thought, if I don't hunt opening day, I'm not going to kill something. And that's just not fact. And it's proven out through all of our hunting seasons. Commissioner Hoover. When we had 1 million hunters in the woods, today 500,000, not moving deer, blaming that on older hunters, that's a young man's game. So, he basically said that, okay, it's not a monumental thing to be out there on opening day as it was 20 years ago, maybe. And so that leads us more into other factors that were important in this change, like we're bringing up the family Thanksgiving shortening, the traditions that were lost, the economic impact, all of those things now become more important because it's not the same anymore. And I lived through this as you have, Dan. There was a time that I would agree wholeheartedly. If you're out in the woods Monday, your chances were exponentially better. Opening day, I should say. Not anymore. There's just not the hunters. There's not the deer movement. Many guys now with the crossbow have tagged out. Commissioner Hoover, I agree with him completely that it's not the apex of you got to be out there on opening day. That's gone. So again, trying to bring the facts to everybody out there of what happened. But let's see, we're going to be pushing an hour here.
Yep, I think we need to wrap it up.
Yeah, we're going to talk the next podcast. I have the survey data, which identifies some stunning revelations to the effects that happened over the last 3 or 5 years regarding the Game Commission came out with the statement hunters prefer the Saturday. But when you take 3 or 4 of these pages out of here, and I'll show them to you and read them verbatim, it shows that it had less than 2% impact on hunter positive aspects from hunting the opening day per se and so forth. But as of today, we can probably leave this where it's at, Dan. What do you think? And then just tell everybody, where to go to listen to some of this.
Yeah, go to our Facebook page, and we'll post when the next podcast is going to take place, and also give you some highlights to that. Like I said early on when we started today, we are going to have some influential guests on our podcast, and we'll name those here soon. On who those people are, and I think everybody will be kind of surprised at the list of people that we're going to have on that were had that this was near and dear to them, as well as we'll have some other tidbits for you and a little more of information about the game plan going forward. And so with that, I'll turn it back to Randy, and you can close it out, Randy.
Thanks, Dan. First of all, everybody out there, all the hunters, I really hope you all are out having a good time. I mean, get out there and chase those tree rats and squirrels and deer hunt and archery and so forth. I mean, I'm out there too. And, it's unfortunate we have to be in a position like this to be so negative about aspects of the agency, but it's something that needs done. And but if you want to hear our podcast, the first one, they're on YouTube. Just search Opening Day Sportsman, MAN, Sportsman. Podcast 1 was the one we previously recorded. This one will be also on there, podcast 2. And like Dan mentioned, our Facebook page is Pennsylvania Hunters Against the Saturday Deer Opener, which we're seeing a lot of, we're nearing 1,000 group members there and growing every day now. So I wanted to thank everybody again, and we're going to have some more presentations of evidence and circumstances here, and moving forward, and hopefully have like Dan said, the guests to help us further share this with all our sportsmen of the state and women. Thank you very much, and take care. We'll talk to you again on the next podcast.
Okay. Take care, everybody. Bye.